By the end of this lecture, hopefully, you will be able to answer these questions. What are the soil fertility related problems in dryland farming? What are the roles of important macronutrients? And what are the different forms of nutrient losses under field conditions? What are different fertilizer application methods? And which practices are useful in enhancing fertilizer use efficiency under dryland farming conditions? Moderate level projections suggest that human population will cross 9.5 billion by 2050. This means we have to increase our agricultural output by as much as 70% to meet food and fiber demands of this growing population. Against this background, the agriculture in dry lands or dryland farming will get the increasing attention. Drylands cover 40% of the total world's area and are home to about one third of the population. In Pakistan, drylands or rain-fed areas cover 40% of the total cultivable area, that is 12 million hectare. And out of this 12 million hectare, 5 million hectare is cultivated and 7 million hectare is cultivable waste. The 5 million hectare cultivated area is about one quarter of the total cultivated area of the country, but contributes only 10% to the agriculture production. So there is a huge scope for increasing the productivity of dry lands. It is well established and well realized that dry lands are thirsty for water. What is less established or less realized is that dry lands are also hungry for nutrients. One of the main reasons for low productivity of dry lands is low soil fertility. Low soil fertility is a result of different reasons. For example, low soil moisture availability, as plant nutrients are available in soil solution form, and moisture availability is scarce under dryland conditions. So this also means nutrient deficiency for plants. Second major reason is the high temperature, which causes the decomposition of organic matter and loss of nutrients such as nitrogen. Third factor is the low or sparse vegetation. This means there is low amount of crop residues and low buildup of soil organic matter. Fourth important factor is depletion of soil carbon and nitrogen resulting from tillage operations. Erosion, runoff, low fertilizer application due to low target yield or expected yields, and limited choice of crops, low fertilizer use efficiency due to imbalanced application of fertilizers, and overall low yields, and fallowing as a result of monocropping, nutrient mining. All these factors result in low soil fertility or negative nutrient balances in dry lands. If we talk about Pakistan, 100% of dry lands are deficient in nitrogen and 90% in phosphorus, 20 to 40% in potassium. Besides this, various micro and secondary macronutrient deficiencies are also reported. Besides water conservation, we also have to improve the soil fertility if we are to increase the productivity and sustainability of dry lands. The future scenario suggests that in dry land development, there will be more intensive cropping, less intensive tillage, and shorter fallow periods. More intensive cropping means more number of crops and more requirement or demand for nutrients. So we need to increase the nutrient availability in dryland soils. Less intense tillage means the conservation tillage approaches which maintain 30% or more crop residues on the soil surface. Fallowing will be shortened as more number of crops will be grown or the crop intensity will increase. So more intensive cropping, less intensive tillage, and shorter fallow periods uh, are being accomplished or will be accomplished by the availability of good quality herbicides, special planting equipment, by incorporation of crop residues, and improved genetics or the development of new varieties and exploration of alternative crops. Uh, when we introduce new varieties or alternative crops, for example, grape cultivation or vegetable cultivation in our Barani tract, it means we also have to increase the nutrient availability for these alternative or high demanding crops. So in this scenario, the rational and efficient use of fertilizer will be imperative for dryland development. Next to water, nitrogen is the most limiting factor for crop production. Nitrogen is one of the three primary macronutrients and is required in the largest amounts by plants. Nitrogen is a constituent of amino acids, proteins, nucleic acids, uh, chlorophyll, hormones such as indole acetic acid and cytokinins, and enzymes like rubisco. Nitrogen is a mobile element within the plant and is continuously reused as proteins are broken down and resynthesized. The deficiency symptoms of nitrogen being mobile appear on the older leaves and include stunted growth of plant, yellowing of leaves, accumulation of anthocyanins, uh, and early growth. Whereas excess nitrogen stimulates abundant growth of the shoot stem and will often delay the onset of flowering and negatively affect the crop quality by affecting the protein content. The nitrogen supply must match with the periods of highest crop demand and also the periods of moisture availability, because moisture availability affects the nitrogen availability more than other nutrients such as phosphorus and potassium. The main supplies of nitrogen include the residual nitrogen at the time of seeding, mineralization of nitrogen from soil organic matter or crop residues. Mineralization is the conversion of nitrogen from organic to plant usable inorganic forms. Before the introduction of chemical fertilizers, the crop production depended on nitrogen mineralized from the soil. Mineralization is the process by which soil organic nitrogen was converted into plant usable inorganic forms of nitrogen. Summer fallowing was practiced to store water and nitrogen for utilization by the upcoming or following crop. However, with the passage of time, the limited addition of nitrogen due to depletion of soil organic matter, the mineralization potential of soil has decreased substantially. The nitrogen mineralized from crop residues depends on the type and amount of residues and nitrogen content of residues. Legumes usually have a high nitrogen content and lower CN ratio than cereals and are ideal for uh, release of nitrogen when plowed under the soil. The other sources of nitrogen supply are green manure crops such as legumes, which have lower CN ratio and high nitrogen content, and when plowed under the soil, they can contribute substantial amounts of nitrogen to the soil. Animal waste such as farmyard manure or poultry manure and chemical fertilizers are the other sources of supply for nitrogen. There are also different uh, forms of losses of nitrogen, such as immobilization, volatilization, uh, denitrification, and leaching. Volatilization is the loss of nitrogen through the conversion of ammonium to ammonia gas. The ammonia gas is released to the atmosphere and causes the air pollution. The volatilization losses are favored by high soil pH, high temperature, and windy weather. Volatilization losses are increased when manures or urea fertilizers are surface applied and not incorporated by tillage, or when there is insufficient rainfall or absence of water. Immobilization is the reverse of mineralization. In immobilization, the inorganic forms of nitrogen, that is, nitrate and ammonium, are tied up or taken up by soil organisms, and therefore they become unavailable to crops. The soil organisms also compete with crops for nitrogen. However, when these soil organisms die or decay, then that nitrogen can be released. Denitrification is the loss of nitrogen by conversion of nitrate to gaseous forms of nitrogen such as nitric oxide, nitrous oxide, or dinitrogen gas. Denitrification occurs under flooded or saturated soil conditions when there is deficiency of oxygen and bacteria use nitrate as an oxygen source. Leaching occurs when the nitrate moves along with water into deeper layers of soil. Because soil is also negatively charged and it doesn't retain nitrate very well, so the rate of leaching depends on soil drainage, rainfall, the amount of nitrate present in the soil, and the uptake by crop. Leaching is the movement of nitrate along with water in the soil and is of great concern for deteriorating the groundwater quality. However, leaching is less of a problem in arid regions due to limited availability of water in the soil. The extent of different nitrogen losses will depend on soil and climatic conditions. For example, leaching losses will be more in coarse texture soil than in fine texture soils. And denitrification losses will be more in humid regions than in arid regions. So, nitrogen management decisions should consider the soil and climatic conditions to assess the potential of different forms of nitrogen losses. Nitrogen management decisions uh, should aim at deciding the best dose, timing, and nitrogen placement. When we talk about nitrogen placement, nitrogen can be placed on the surface or there can be in soil application. When nitrogen is applied on the surface or broadcasted on the surface, then it must be incorporated by tillage or by moisture availability through supplemental irrigation or rainfall. Because if nitrogenous fertilizers are left on the soil surface, they are prone to volatilization losses in the form of ammonia gas. And nitrogen left on the surface can also be immobilized if there are crop residues on the soil surface. The immobilization of nitrogen by soil microorganisms will depend on the CN ratio of crop residues and the amount of crop residues. In order to prevent the volatilization and immobilization losses, the other strategies are the application of ammonium nitrate instead of urea, or using the urease inhibitor slows the process of conversion of urea to ammonium, and this allows urea to enter into the soil by tillage or by uh, availability of moisture. And in situations where uh, more crop residues are left on the soil surface, for example in conservation tillage, it is better to uh, adopt the in soil application or placing the nitrogen just below the crop residues. This can significantly reduce the volatilization as well as immobilization losses. But the in soil application requires specific equipment. So the availability and cost of equipment and the amount and type of residues uh, will determine whether to apply or place nitrogen as broadcast or in soil. For practical reasons, the broadcasting of nitrogen fertilizers is more convenient, and the reduced efficiency of broadcast application is compensated by higher dose of nitrogen application. Another strategy is foliar application of nitrogenous fertilizers, especially around the reproductive stage and under conditions of limited moisture availability when the transport of nutrients from soil solution to plant roots is limited. So 2 to 3% solutions can be foliarly applied. However, care must be taken to avoid the higher doses which may cause leaf burn. In plants, phosphorus is largely found as phosphate esters, including the sugar phosphates, which has an important role to play in Calvin cycle and in intermediary metabolism. Other forms of phosphate esters include phospholipids found in cellular membrane, nucleotides that make up DNA and RNA, and nucleotides that make up ATP and ADP. Along with ATP and ADP, the inorganic phosphate, the phosphorylated sugars, and phosphorylated organic acids are an integral component of the energy metabolism of cell. The actual concentration of soluble phosphorus in soils is very low, in the order of 1 micromolar, because of several factors. One factor is the tendency of phosphorus to form insoluble complexes depending on soil pH. At low or neutral soil pH, it forms complexes with aluminium and iron, and at higher pH with calcium and magnesium. This is why the phosphorus is mostly limiting in the highly calcareous soils. Second factor is the binding of phosphorus in organic forms, which must be converted to inorganic forms by soil microorganisms or phosphatase enzymes before it can be made available for plants. A successful strategy adopted by plants for phosphorus availability is the formation of intimate association between roots and soil fungi called as mycorrhiza. As phosphorus availability is constrained by phosphorus fixation in the soil, so first the general level of phosphorus in the soil should be built up by broadcast application. So whole amount of phosphatic fertilizer is applied during seedbed preparation or at the time of seeding and incorporated into the topsoil layer by tillage operations. Subsequently, band application can also be effective under conditions of high moisture supply, such as band application of water soluble phosphates in the vicinity of the seed row, or in arid zone soils. The band application can enable the plants to better resist drought conditions, because in band application the phosphatic fertilizer is mixed with only a limited volume of the soil. The third primary macronutrient is potassium, which is an activator of a number of enzymes, most notably those involved in photosynthesis and respiration. So potassium has an important role to play in starch and protein synthesis, and potassium is also a regulator of the osmotic potential of cells. In soils, potash is less mobile than nitrogen but more mobile than phosphorus. And usual practice is the application of potash by broadcasting at the time of seeding and incorporation into the soil. However, the band application is more effective than broadcasting. Band application below the row and to the side of the rows, because potassium creates the high osmotic pressure, so placing it along with the seed or close to the seed can cause problems. So, first step uh, before deciding the application of potassium is to test the soil whether it is deficient in potassium or not. Then the best strategy is banded application of potassium. Among secondary macronutrients, sulfur deficiency is reported, which can be corrected by liming or the application of gypsum. Gypsum also improves the water infiltration into the soil. Since sulfur is not prone to volatilization or denitrification losses like nitrogen, broadcasting sulfur and incorporation into the soil is the cheapest and easiest method for correcting sulfur deficiencies. In case of micronutrient deficiencies, especially for high value crops like fruit trees, the foliar or exogenous application of fertilizers in the form of sprays is highly recommended. Since fertilizers are a costly input, every effort must be made to improve the efficiency of fertilizer use in dryland farming. There are different options available for improving fertilizer use efficiency. For example, adjusting the dose and timing of fertilizer application. Usually, the dose of recommended nutrients for rain-fed areas is less than for irrigated areas in case of cereal crops, whereas for pulse crops the recommended dose is same for irrigated and rain-fed areas. Similarly, the timing of fertilizer application can also be adjusted in Rabi season or winter season. The whole amount of nitrogenous, phosphatic and potassic fertilizers is applied at the time of sowing, whereas in Kharif season or summer season, the nitrogen is applied in 2 or 3 supplets to avoid the leaching losses. Proper fertilizer placement is the key for enhancing the use efficiency of fertilizers. In case of nitrogenous fertilizers, broadcasting and incorporation into the soil by supplementary irrigation or by rainfall water is a must. The phosphatic and potassic fertilizers are applied at the time of sowing and must be incorporated into the soil, or they can be applied in the form of band placement. That is especially useful for potash. In case of phosphorus, the band application is not useful when there is severe deficiency of phosphorus. So before adopting the band placement, sufficient levels of phosphorus must be built up in the soil. And in case of micronutrient deficiencies, foliar sprays are effective. The fertilizers can also be placed by opening up the rows behind the country or desi plow, where specialized equipment for placing fertilizers below the crop residues is not available. Another strategy is building up of soil organic matter by adding farmyard manure or poultry manure or compost, or by green manuring. Green manuring is highly effective for improving both the physical and chemical properties of soil and the building of soil organic matter, which is panacea for agriculture. Mixed application of phosphorus with farmyard manure considerably improves the use efficiency of phosphorus. Biofertilizers can be used for improving the symbiotic nitrogen fixation in pulse crops, and diversified rotations, which include both leguminous and non-leguminous crops, and both shallow rooted and deep rooted crops, improve the efficiency of fertilizer uptake and its conversion into marketable yield. The crop management practices such as balanced use of fertilizers, proper irrigation, maintaining optimum plant density uh, according to soil and climatic conditions must be followed to improve fertilizer use efficiencies. Conservation tillage approaches, which leave crop residues on the soil surface, and water conservation practices such as land leveling, terracing, contouring, bunding, all these improve the, the efficiency of fertilizer use in dryland farming. So by following all these practices, we can significantly improve the efficiency of fertilizer use in dryland farming.